On the night of the Big Blitz, my parents had two visitors. My sisters and I were in bed and I heard the siren. Absolutely terrified, I literally jumped the stairs, opened the living room door and just pointed. I just could not speak. I couldn't enter a sound. I was so terrified. The visitors who lived nearby went home. My father pulled on his uniform, got on his bike and headed to the barracks. My sisters, Joan and Frances, had been playing house earlier in the day and had covered the floor of the under the stairs cupboard with large brown velvet cushions. My mother packed us in there, not a breath, and the family cat. Waves of aircraft descended on the city and I thought the paratroopers were landing on the roof. Bombs kept dropping and exploding. The noise was unbelievable. And by 1:45 a.m. the city was ablaze. History records the siren as sounding at 10:40 p.m. The noise was absolutely horrendous, and despite the blackout, if you opened the door of our hideout just ajar, you could see the red glow. Halfway through the night, I could stick the noise and the confinement no longer, and I absolutely defied my mother and went upstairs to the top of our 3-story house. I looked out the window and the whole city was ablaze, an extraordinary sight and a pungent smell. Next morning we discovered our neighbours had incendiary bombs, also near Fitzroy Church, and no sign of my father. My mother was in a state but concealed it from us. My Aunt Kathleen was engaged in private nursing and lived on the Antrim Road. She always bought a new rig out for Easter and had just purchased a fancy pale blue fur fabric coat. Late in the day she arrived at our house, having walked the whole way to the university area from Antrim Road. She was covered in dust and soot. The coat, formerly pale blue, was black and covered in soot, and she was obviously badly shot. The house where the nurses lived had been hit, and she had been blown across the room and landed under a grand piano. My father arrived home on the third day, his uniform torn and singed, and told us the morgue could not hold all the bodies, and the falls bath had been drained and St George's Market also used. He and a detective called Raphael were helping people in the markets area. I recall him talking about one woman who had had a baby during the air raid, or she had just given birth at home beforehand. He carried the mother on his back to safety, and the detective Raphael put the newborn child in his uniform coat. He was diverted then to the York Street area, as the York Street barracks had hit. I recall my mother, my aunt and the neighbours being in tears at the endless funerals and people being buried, even families and babies who had not been identified. Lord Haw Haw, an Irish man, broadcast quite often from Germany, was listened to and laughed at, but it turned out his forecast was true. He actually eventually was tried as a war criminal. After this bad blitz, when so many lost their lives, were injured or rendered homeless, they evacuated if possible. Many families would walk to the end of the lines about 9 or 10 o'clock at night and actually spend the night in a car or in the ditches. What stands out in my mind is the actual noise, and wave after wave of planes overhead dropping bombs. It was the fear and the noise is what stands out in my mind. And I couldn't stick the confinement under the stairs. Even though I was young, I just gave up and just insisted on going out. Our house, mostly at the front and the back, except the top story, had those wooden shutters. We never used them, but when blackout was declared, they were very useful. My mother used them at night. It was the attic rooms had no shutters, and I went right up to the very top front attic. And the whole of Belfast was this bright pink, mad red colour, and you could actually see the flame. It was a Sunday night air raid. It just wasn't as bad. But that reconnaissance flight I actually saw, and I could practically see the pilot. He was flying so low over University Street. I think they thought they probably wouldn't get as far as Belfast, the plane safely. And I thought they were doing reconnaissance flights, and then because I suppose the shipyard was going non-stop, and the aircraft factory and the rope works and places making, parachutes and stuff for the war, people thought we were safe, and we weren't safe at all.